interference inside of our country. That report was about what these different elements do to interfere in our country and to undermine our foreign policy.
The president recently talked about Chinese election interference in the U.S., and as we know, there are many other ways in which China has influence within the U.S.
Well, again, what the president put out on Thursday, that was a declassification of documents from our intelligence community. That's what he put out. He declassified intelligence assessments from our intelligence community. But your question was about communist influence. Yeah, the United States doesn't want to be a communist country. We're never going to be a communist country, and we're not going to allow communist influences to undermine our politics or our society. So I don't know what the inconsistency you're referring to is. It's very clear. Obviously we understand the Chinese system and other systems, but I can tell you our system doesn't want communism, and we're certainly not going to allow communist efforts to undermine American society and drive wedges into our country, and that's what we're seeing. And by the way, one of the leading culprits of that for many years, the intellectual authors, particularly in our hemisphere, is the Cuban regime, which our report on Monday outlined.
Are the Cubans having a bigger impact
Did
on
you
the Chinese?
express concern regarding the clash between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea?
Did we discuss it with?
Clash between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea.
Oh yeah, it's been a high-profile issue. We've all seen it, and it's a sort of an escalatory thing that we think is very negative, and benefits no one. And obviously, we've reiterated in every meeting we've had that the U.S. has a treaty arrangement with the Philippines. I believe we're the only treaty partner the Philippines has. We intend to live up to our treaty obligations, and I think we've done so, and will continue to do so.
With sense of escalation, how difficult is it to inspire confidence at these meetings, such as the ones you've had today, that the U.S. can bring a quick end to the war in Iran?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is it difficult to inspire confidence that the U.S. can swiftly and effectively end the war?
No, I think everybody here understands that the U.S. would love to reach a diplomatic settlement. We would love to reach an agreement, if it were possible, with Iran that would ensure they never have a nuclear weapon and obviously help stop them. And we'd love to have an agreement where they say we'll no longer sponsor terrorism and we will not pursue a nuclear weapon or the things you need for a nuclear weapon. I think if there's a lack of confidence, is the lack of confidence that the Iranian regime will ever agree to any of those things. That would be the lack of confidence. And the bigger lack of confidence should be that they've already made commitments very recently in a memorandum of understanding, and within 2 weeks had violated it. So I think if there's any undermining of confidence, it's confidence that the Iranian system, as it currently is structured, can reach an agreement. And so you wonder whether they're serious about an agreement in the short term. But look, the president always prefers to negotiate and reach a deal on these things. And we're willing to do that. And we've tried to do that now for a year and a half, but we're also not going to sit by and let ships be blown up or Americans be attacked.
Do you see any hope for a compromise?
If Iran refuses to negotiate seriously.
Who's this?
If Iran refuses to negotiate seriously,
Iran? Yeah.
What is the next step? So more sanctions, more military actions? Are you prepared for long-term confrontation by Iran?
Well, the president has many options available to him if they continue to insist on not being cooperative, and I won't get ahead of the president on any of those, but I think Iran knows we have many options as well.
The president suggested that Iran should be added to Russia's Sanctions Act. Is this kind of acknowledgement of Moscow-Tehran growing alliance?
Of what now?
Are you guys acknowledging this growing alliance between the two? Because you're suggesting to add Iran to Russia's Sanctions Act.
Oh, I just think the president views as a legislative vehicle that's going to pass in Congress and provides him more authorities to impose higher economic costs on Iran if it's necessary to do so. So I don't think it has. I think it's just a bill that's moving, and it's a sanctions bill, and so it makes sense if you're going to add additional sanctions to do it to that bill.
On Cuba, is the goal still creating regime change through economic collapse, or is the military option?
I think the goal is to have a Cuba where the people of Cuba can experience prosperity, safety, security, and a better life moving forward, the way Cubans are able to do all over the world when they leave Cuba. And we're prepared to be very realistic about how you do that, and patient about how you get in a serious process that leads to that. And we've engaged them from time to time in that regard, and they know where we stand on that issue, and hopefully that's where it arrives. The fundamental problem Cuba has right now is two things. Number one is their economic system doesn't work, because that economic system doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's completely backwards. It just doesn't work, and that's why people have to leave that country. And number two, they're no longer getting free oil from Venezuela. That's their biggest problem. They're not getting free oil from Venezuela, which, by the way, they weren't using for their power grid. They were taking about 60% of the free oil they were getting from Venezuela and reselling it for cash. So the biggest problem Cuba has is that their regime is a disaster, their economic model doesn't work, and the people who run the country don't know what the hell they're doing. And all they're most interested in is holding on to power. They are afraid of economic prosperity because they are afraid that economic prosperity and economic liberties they will lose control over people. And that's always been the struggle they faced in recent times. But again, look, just today, we began shipping over $100 million of humanitarian assistance to Cuba, which will be distributed by non-governmental entities on the ground. So, we're willing to engage with them. We've engaged with them in the past. We'll keep talking to them about the kind of changes they can make. But this is 90 miles from our shores. This is a government that has spent, a regime that has spent the better part of 30, 40, 50 years destabilizing the region and the movements that they've supported. And they've lost, I don't know, 10 to 15% of their population since 2021 because of how mismanaged the country is. We want it to have a better future, and we're prepared to do things that help them get there. But they have to decide they want to do that. The people that are in charge there right now just don't want to do it. It's unfortunate.
The
Very sad.
administration
Very
was
sad.
talking about how they expected just to follow up, to see regime change or to see big changes in Cuba, economic, political, by the end of this year. That's what a lot of them were saying.
Who's a lot of them? Who was saying that?
People within the administration who work on this issue.
Like who? Because I work on this issue more than anybody else.
They
I
weren't
never
predicting
said.
it, but like there was an expectation that Cuba was so.
No,
weak
look,
that
guys.
it
I
was
mean,
going to
look. This global affairs are not like. We're not a mini-series. Like you get in 3 episodes and it's over. I mean, global affairs are difficult. You're talking about a system that's been in place, since 1959. You're talking about a country that suffered tremendously because of poor leadership and a bad economic model. You're talking about a regime that survived all these years because they had a foreign sponsor, be it the Soviet Union or Hugo Chavez. They don't have that anymore. So, these are complex things that take time, and obviously we're prepared to do what we can do to effectuate a positive change in Cuba because it directly impacts our national security. Cuba matters to us because it's 90 miles from our shores and it has a direct impact on our national security, be it the things they've been involved in the past, the countries they've aligned with in the past and currently, or the threat of mass migration, which is always a risk that you run when countries are as deeply destabilized as Cuba is. It's a failed state. It's a failed state, but I've never laid out any timeline as to what change would look like or when it would happen. I wish it was tomorrow because they deserve it. The people of Cuba deserve a better future.
Mr. Secretary, on your argument that Iran has violated the MOU, isn't the MOU inherently flawed because in paragraph 5 it explicitly acknowledges Iran has power in the Strait of Hormuz, whereas no other formal agreement before had acknowledged or recognized
No,
that?
I don't think that's what the MOU says. Certainly that's not the way we interpreted it from the very beginning. We understood that to mean, we understood that to mean that they would ensure that no ships were being blown up, and they chose to violate that. The MOU does not give them the right to launch drones and missiles against commercial shipping vessels. The MOU doesn't give them the right to do that, and they chose to do it.
Power over the strait to begin with in the MOU?
Well, we don't acknowledge their power. But the only thing I tell you that they have missiles and drones, and they're launching them against ships. The MOU doesn't say you're allowed to launch missiles and drones against commercial shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. It doesn't say that anywhere in the MOU.
You mentioned, Secretary, that China has been cooperative in some ways with the issue of Iran. What were you?
Well, I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but I'm going to tell you one in particular, and that is they've been pretty clear that they don't support any tolling or restrictions on global shipping through an international waterway. And a statement like that from a country like China is important.
How concerning is the Houthi threat for the additional shipments of energy for the Saudis? Are you worried that that could have a...
Well, the Houthis have done that in the past, as you know. They've threatened global shipping there in the past. And, again, anything that restricts shipping through the Red Sea would be problematic for the same reasons that the Strait of Hormuz is problematic. So we're watching that closely, that situation. We've been engaged with the Saudis on a number of times over the last week in regards to that threat. It's not a new threat, but it's one that's manifested itself in the past. But at the gist of that issue is the fact that, again, Iran is in the middle of it. We're talking about the troublemaker in the region, it's Iran. They decided to send direct flights from Tehran into Yemen, carrying IRGC elements and others into the country. And the Saudis responded to it. And that's what's led to the situation we're now facing. We hope it can be de-escalated. Obviously we're not particularly close to the Houthis, in terms of being able to influence the decisions they make. But I think it's just another example. The Houthis, Hezbollah, the militias in Iraq, Hamas, this is what Iran spends its money on. It's not on its people. It's on supporting terrorist organizations and destabilizing actors in the region.
You've mentioned a couple of times that other countries should join the U.S. to protect shipping in the Strait.
Yeah,
Have you gotten
because
any
it's their
offers?
shipping.
Have you gotten
Yeah, we've had conversations. There are countries that have expressed interest. Again, some of them have different ways they have to get there in terms of how it's authorized. Some need an international flag. You know, they need to do it under the mandate of an international organization. Some need to go through the legislative process. But the reason why I mentioned it to you is because if you look at where that oil and you look at where that energy is destined, it's not to the United States. It's to other countries. And so, yeah, plus I think every country in the world has an interest in protecting the right of shipping in international waters and freedom of navigation.
I know you don't want to get into the details on the Saudi civilian nuclear agreement, but just broadly, for people who have non-proliferation concerns, for people who listen to U.S. rhetoric about how dangerous it would be for another country to get a nuclear weapon, doesn't having a less than gold standard agreement in the Middle East run a risk?
Well, I'm not going to opine directly on that agreement. We're going to put out, even when the moment is appropriate, we'll put out that in writing. We have to do it with Congress anyways, so we'll certainly do it publicly. But suffice it to say, the U.S. is not going to reach any agreement with any country in the world that leads to the risk of proliferation.
Did you discuss non-proliferation in the meeting with the Chinese, or will you be bringing that up with Mr. Lavrov tomorrow?
On nuclear?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't talk about it this time. We've talked about it in the past, and I think the President's point, and he's right, is in the modern era, if we're going to have a nuclear arms restriction talks and arms control talks, it has to include the Chinese side because they're rapidly building their own nuclear capabilities. I would imagine the Chinese will argue that once they catch up to the U.S. and Russia, then they'll enter these negotiations. But until then, I think that's been their historic argument in the past. But I think the President rightly points out that in the 21st century, if you're going to have true arms control, it has to be tri-party. It has to be the U.S., Russia, but also China. But we didn't discuss it today.
Are you satisfied with what China's been doing on the fentanyl issue? It was the basis for a lot of tariffs that appear to be, they keep getting struck down.
Well, we continue to talk to them about that issue, and obviously I think we've made some progress. Some of the commitments that they made in earlier this year, they've begun to live by. Others remain a work in progress, and I know that as recently as today, our law enforcement is visiting China, and we've had their law enforcement come to Washington earlier in the year. So we remain engaged with them, and ultimately we think in the long term this poses a threat to China as well. So I would hope that they would have an interest in being cooperative because in the end these same elements that are shipping fentanyl precursors all over the world will eventually do the same if they're not doing it already inside of China and their neighboring countries. So it's a work in progress, but I think we've made some progress on that front, but not entirely where we need to be.
Today you met with Japanese foreign minister.
Yes.
And China has been its economic and military pressure on Japan. So how do you see the worsening of Japan-China relationship? How do you see how do you view the worsening?
Oh, the worsening, yeah. So look, I mean, obviously we're very close to Japan. We understand what they're facing right now. They're facing real restrictions, export controls and all sorts of things. And obviously you talked about some of the aggressive measures that have been taken. It's a troubling trend. I don't think that China-Japan relations are at their high point right now. We're very close to Japan. We have treaty obligations with Japan. We have deep history of cooperation with Japan, and that's going to continue. But we see it with concern.
After securing one American's release from Iran last week, can Americans expect more detainees to come home, including colored?
I think they should all be home. I'm not going to predict or prognosticate what others we may see released, but we would like to see them all the wrongfully detained people released, not just from Iran, but all over the world. But it'll always be a priority in our conversations, even when those restart.
How's that channel working? There's so much hostilities, literally, between Iran and the United States. Yet you
Which channel?
The channel to get wrongfully detained people out. Obviously, just bore some success. How is that happening amidst this warfare going on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a valid point. I mean, we were fortunate to see one instance in which one person who shouldn't have been there should not have been held there was released. We'd like to see more. It's a feature of our conversation with them. It would obviously be easier to have that conversation if some of these other things weren't ongoing. But I think the fact that we're even detained to begin with speaks volumes as to the nature of the regime that we're dealing with. But yeah, I mean, it's not the most productive moment for it, but we're very fortunate and blessed that lady got out because she never should have been held in the first place.
Mr. Secretary, is there anything you can tell us about the pending U.S. arms sale to Taiwan?
I'm sorry? Well, there was one late last year, and the other one continues to be under review. As I said, we had the largest single sale ever in December. So it's not like nothing has happened, but since there's a second pending sale that's been notified to Congress, but it's still undergoing a review internally.
Why is that under review? Your State Department.
Well, there's a lot of
sent it to
reasons.
Congress.
I know,
Congress
but there's a lot of
has
reasons why arms are under review, and that includes, we have to look at our own stockpiles. We have to look at the availability of whatever it is we're promising to do. As you know, there's a huge effort on our part to restart our defense industrial base and restart its ability to produce. People ask this all the time. I mean, we've made very extensive sales and have continued to make sales, for example, to Ukraine. And before that, we gave them to Ukraine. So all these things have an impact, and we do have our own domestic needs that have to be balanced with whatever commitments we make to other countries. So it would be normal for a large sale to be reviewed in that context.
One of the Tate
US
brothers
trying to
lawyers mentioned you by name. I know
Who?
One of the Tate brothers lawyers mentioned you by name. Do you plan to get involved with the extradition challenge that they have been?
Mention me by name?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, look, that extraditions, I don't know the details of this particular case. I've been overseas, but I mean, I know who you're talking about. I just don't know the details of it. These cases have a process that they go through in the courts. My understanding is that they're involved in that judicial process. And so that'll play itself out at this point. And there's no role for us to play at this moment or maybe ever in that regard. But I'm not going to opine on something that's still working through a legal process.
Is the U.S. trying to get Syria involved in fighting Hezbollah?
Hold on. Go ahead.
Is the U.S. trying to get Syria involved in fighting Hezbollah, as the president has suggested?
Well, the Syrian authorities are not big fans of Hezbollah. But what we've encouraged Syria to do is to focus on its own internal challenges that it has in sort of building a nation state. They still face pretty substantial challenges and threats from within. I mean, ISIS remains a threat there. There are other areas of cooperation. As you know, we've removed them from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, which we hope will lead to the sort of economic revival that the country desperately needs. Syria is a country that has a history of different communities for many, many years living alongside one another in peace. Sunni, Shia, Christian. I mean, it's a country, the Kurds. But they have a huge project on their hands in that regard, and so we've encouraged them to focus on that. But we understand the threat that Hezbollah is an enemy of this new government in Syria, and they, in many ways, will seek to undermine that government over time. And one of the best things Syria can do to secure its future is to secure their border with Lebanon, so that we don't have weapons and arms coming back and forth across that border in an effort to destabilize Syria. What were you asking?
Many national security advisors have put their stamp on the NSC bureaucracy, Scowcroft model, large models in the Obama administration. How do you want to be remembered for the stamp that you're putting on this? Are you streamlining things?
The NSC works for the president, and so the stamp we want to have is the stamp any NSC director should have. It's not my stamp. The NSC is there to serve the president, and each president will have different requirements for what they want the NSC's role to be. And so, to the extent I want a legacy with regards to the NSC, it is an NSC that was responsive to the needs of this particular administration and this president's style of leadership. He's very hands-on, he's very involved, and our job at the NSC is to coordinate the interagency to execute on the president's policies. And that's how I view the NSC. That's the way it should always be.
Does it still have its convening power, or has
it
been
happens every day.
Depopulated so much that other agencies are starting to...
I think the NSC was way too large to begin with. 400, 300 people. We don't need 300 people in the NSC to coordinate the interagency. That's why you have career people and others at the State Department and at Treasury and at Energy and at the Department of War and in the intelligence agencies. And the job of the NSC is to coordinate the interagency so that it's executing on the president's foreign policy and developing options through the interagency. So the expertise should reside in the different agencies of government. And the NSC's job is simply to be the coordinator of that effort, to deliver on the president's intent, either to present the president options or to execute on the president's directive. That's what the NSC is doing, and I think quite successfully. You don't need a large bureaucracy to do that.
There are Americans in China that have been wrongfully detained, Chen Yolin and Min Tin. Did you raise those today?
Well, we always raise the case of Americans, and we do so outside of these meetings as well. And we do so through the embassy. We do it through multiple engagements.
Do you expect that China should release them ahead
we want them to.
Part of the meeting?
Well, we want them to. I won't precondition the meeting in September other than to say that we raise these issues every time, and we raise it not just, I mean, we raise it all the time. I mean, we raise it through the embassy, we raise it through every engagement we have. Those are always a priority, and we've had good news in the past and hope to have some good news in the future.
Secretary,
all right, guys.
Was wrongfully detained. He mentioned Min Zin, but
Who?
Min Zin, who was arrested right after the summit, right after the Trump.
The scientist?
No, not the scientist. He was a researcher.
Yeah, the research on geologists.
Not geologist. He was researching Myanmar, and he was arrested in Yunnan province. But has he been classified as wrongfully detained by the State Department?
I don't believe so yet.
Okay.
But again, we have a process we go through to make those determinations. That doesn't mean he won't be. That process has to work its way through.
What's the overall approach, Secretary, to Myanmar and to potentially re-engaging with the junta there or cooperating on issues like rare earths?
What's the
position or the approach of the Trump administration towards Myanmar and re-engagement with the government?
Yeah, no, well, I don't have any announcement for you on that today. It's a policy that we're still developing in many ways. Obviously, there's some conditions that have been shifting with regards to Myanmar or Burma over the last few months that we're keeping an eye on and see if there's opportunities to engage. Obviously, we still have many concerns about some of the things that have happened in that country historically and in the past. And there also remains the question of how receptive and open they are to a different relationship with the United States as well. So these things are still being worked on, but I don't have any announcement on that today other than, they were here and they were present today. And I'm glad they were here, and I said that in our forum. But it's not a place we have a long history of engagement in recent times. So if an opportunity presents itself to do something that serves our national interests, we'll explore it. But there's still some work to be done in that regard. Okay, guys.
Can you confirm
thanks.
that the White House will be announcing a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia today?
I don't have any news for you on that today, but maybe later today, once Washington wakes up, or if there is an announcement, I promise you you'll know about it. Okay? Thanks.
We're going
that way.
Thank you, sir.
Jackals breaking up.